At least you're sitting up in the front row. Usually everybody just heads to the back or to near the door. You ready? Count it down. 3, 2, 1, go. All right. Morning, everybody. My name is Brian Wrozek. I'm with the Office of the CISO from Optiv. I've been working with them for 5 weeks now. So I just recently joined them. I spent 2 years as the Chief Security Officer for a company called Alliance Data. They're the parent company for a number of different companies like Epsilon. You may have heard of Epsilon. And then prior to that, I spent 14 years as the Chief Information Security Officer for Texas Instruments. So I'm actually from Dallas, Texas, and came up here for the conference. It's a little bit of a homecoming for me because I grew up in Jackson, Michigan, which is just down the road. And then I also went to school at Michigan Tech. So people familiar with Michigan Tech up in the UP? Yeah, it was really interesting. So Texas Instruments was pretty clever when they were recruiting me out of college. They actually flew me down to interview in December. So I walk off the airplane in Dallas, Texas, about the middle of December. I think it was around 75 degrees. And I remember telling HR at the time, if you move me here, I'll work for free the first year. And so I never looked back after moving down there. I do like coming back to Michigan. In fact, I'm going to head out of here after this conference and visit with my brother in East Lansing. But boy, it's hard to leave that nice sunny weather. I woke up this morning and it was 37. I don't think we'll see 37 until January. So it's pretty interesting. But thanks for letting me come and speak today. So I'm going to talk about security frameworks. I'll talk a little bit about why companies should adopt them, and give you a little highlight of all the different types of frameworks that there are. Talk a little bit about some of the pitfalls and some recommendations. So this is not meant to be a deep dive analysis of all the different frameworks. I'm going to highlight some of the benefits, how I've used them in the past and how I continue to use them. And the other thing I would like you to do is just kind of pay attention to some of the formatting of the slides. I can't take credit for all of those. My marketing department helped me. But one of the things I've learned along the way is even if you have really good information and even if you have very correct information, sometimes how you present it is just as important as the information itself. Because computer security, when you're speaking to executives, it's a tough thing for them to get their hands around. A lot of times they'll try to make analogies to physical security, and as we know, that doesn't always line up directly. So really how you present your information can go a long way. So for Chief Information Security Officers, their job has radically changed. In the past, we used to just have to worry about technology and some operational activities, but now the scope of the job has greatly increased. So they're having to worry about all types of information risk and data risk, managing third parties, compliance, some cases even privacy. I was responsible for privacy at Texas Instruments when I was there. So there's a whole bunch of stuff being piled on information security these days. And with that evolution, we have a lot more stuff to consider. So we still have to worry about all the old, traditional stack of data, systems, network, application, and user. But now you throw on things like big data, cloud, mobility, cyber insurance. I was at a talk yesterday, and the guy was talking about incident response and hunting. So that's yet another thing to add to my to-do list. And so if you think about it, this whole laundry list of things that Chief Information Security Officers have to consider starts to get kind of overwhelming. So when you sit down and put together your plan for next year, how do you make sense of all that information? How do you make sense out of the 100, 200 different things that you could do next year? What's the right one to choose? And how do you know you're choosing the right one? So that's where I think frameworks come in and really help out. But even if you think you have a good plan put together, something like this will happen. I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but it's happened to me a number of times in the past. Some new headline will come out, or my boss will swing by my office with a photocopy of the article and say, hey, you say, are we ignoring these 5 best practices? Can you give me a report by the end of the day and let me know how we're doing? Or worse, the CFO comes back from a business trip and he read CFO magazine or CIO magazine, and he comes back with, hey, here are top 10 cybersecurity questions that they say CEOs should ask. Can you get me an answer to each one of these 10 questions? So now that just totally derails my activities, because now I got to get one of my architects and other members of my security team off going and finding answers to all these questions. So again, with all this whirlwind of activities and things that interrupt your plans, how do you stay on track? So I think that's where frameworks come in. So I've tried to group these frameworks into a couple different areas. So the first one is around regulatory frameworks. I don't know, hopefully you're familiar with some of these, with HIPAA, NERC. I don't usually see security people, raising their hand and jumping up and down saying, yeah, I want to follow that framework, or I want to follow that standard. Especially if you're not in the healthcare industry. I don't see too many manufacturing or retail companies adopting HIPAA as their framework. But if that's an area that you're in, that's a good place to start. I mean, it's better than nothing. Give it a shot. But again, you really need to take a look at what your industry is like. The other grouping is what we traditionally see, right? We're all pretty familiar with these security frameworks. And they may not be 100% dedicated to security. It may be related to audit or risk management. But these are frameworks that I suspect many of you recognize and have checked out at one time or another. The last group, I don't know if I really would call them frameworks, but you can use them as frameworks. You can maybe think of them more as protocols or methodologies, something like, protect, detect, react. It's not a framework, but it's a way that you could group your security controls and your security priorities and bring some sense to the madness. All right, so what framework is right for you? So I apologize if you were going to come here thinking I was going to say, hey, use framework X, because it's really not quite that easy. It's almost like asking yourself, what's the best diet or exercise program for me? Right, we all have different body types, different metabolism, different physical abilities. So there's really no one right program for everybody. But they all can be successful to a degree if you follow them properly. And different people are going to have different success with different programs. I think the same is true of security frameworks. Right? Everybody's going to have their own degree of success. But what you can do is start asking yourself some different types of questions. So again, do you accept credit cards for payments? Well, then you have to follow PCI. Is PCI the only framework you should follow? Probably not, but again, it's a good place to start, and it's a good way to look at your security program. A couple other ones that I thought were interesting is, does your cybersecurity insurance policy call out a specific framework? We're starting to see more and more insurance companies who are writing policies around cybersecurity. They're getting much more detailed in their analysis of your cybersecurity program. Now, I haven't seen one yet that will give you, a premium break if you're following a particular framework, but having a framework that you are following certainly makes a good impression on the people that are doing the assessment. And the other question, number 10, do you have any customers or partners that have contractual obligations on you? I didn't experience this from a framework standpoint, but years ago, when Nokia was TI's #1 customer, I think we used to do $2 to $3 billion worth of work for them. If they asked us to do something, boy, that got a lot of attention at the executive level. So when they said, hey, it'd be nice if you guys did disk encryption, guess what became my top priority for that year, right? Rolling out disk encryption. So you might want to take a look at what your partners and suppliers are following as well. Really the key thing is, can you answer that question, why did you pick that framework? So if you look at the latest NIST cybersecurity framework, again, I come from Texas, so a lot of security directors that I know come from the oil and gas industry. So they're adopting the NIST cybersecurity framework. So they can provide a pretty compelling argument to people of why they chose that framework. They can say, well, the president, signed Executive Order 13636 to improve critical infrastructure cybersecurity. Over 3,000 security people, both from the public, private, and academia world, participate in it. It was like a year-long effort. Did any of you guys participate in any of the workshops for development of that? A few people. It's voluntary, but if we follow it now, it's a good way of benchmarking with other peers in the industry. And it promotes sort of a nice standard terminology. So when you are benchmarking with peers or when you are talking with regulators, you can talk about those key areas, right? Protect, detect, respond, identify. It gives you a way to talk about that as well as to your board of directors. So that makes a lot more compelling argument of why you chose this framework than, well, I don't know, it seemed like a good one at the time, or so-and-so is using it, so I thought I would use it too. So if you've got a method to your madness, I found that to be very compelling. As I was researching all these different frameworks, it's hard to compare them one-to-one. Some are very detailed and prescriptive, some speak in very generalized terms. But what I did find interesting is most frameworks spoke to these 4 fundamental areas. So data classification, identity and access management, monitoring, and then the 4th one was a little bit of a surprise, is physical security. So even though we're talking cybersecurity, most of the frameworks that I looked at included some element of physical security. So even if you don't choose a framework in your program, these are certainly 4 areas that you probably want to take a look at and make sure that you're addressing in your program. All right, so it's not easy picking a framework. You think about it, I just showed you 3 slides, and I'm sure I didn't capture all the different options that you have, but you have a lot of choices. You also have the challenge that part of the framework may not necessarily apply to your company or to your industry. And so what I see a lot of security people do is they sort of cherry pick. They follow this part of ISO, and then they grab these elements from NIST. They may grab 3 or 4 elements from the SANS Top 20. But the challenge with that is you really don't get that nice, harmonious approach to the framework. And then you're in a very uncomfortable position because now you got to answer the question, well, what about this piece? And you got to then you may have to fend off the questions of, well, you just left that part of the framework out because you knew you wouldn't grade very well to it, or you knew we weren't following it. So it puts you in a real tough spot. Also, I think the other challenge is some of these are huge. I mean, COBIT has gotten monstrous over the last few years. Then even the NIST 53, 450 pages. Has anybody read the entire NIST document? Okay, so we've got a few people. I don't think I've read a science fiction book lately that was 450 pages. So that's going to be quite a challenge for me. The other problem I've seen with some frameworks, they're very point in time. PCI is the one that comes to mind. Are you doing this, yes or no? So you can answer, yes, I'm doing that now, and then when the QSA leaves, you go and turn all that stuff back off. So it doesn't necessarily provide a nice view and picture of your security program. And then again, you still have to know your business as you go through it. So again, frameworks, it's not the end-all be-all. There's going to be some challenges, but there definitely are some benefits. So if we look at what some of those benefits are, one of the things that I really like is that it packages all the various controls and things that you could do into a nice grouping. So it gives you a way to kind of chunk up your security program and all the different projects and activities that you could do into a very organized looking framework. Once you have that nice grouping, you can then take and do a security assessment. I've found security assessments to be, with a framework, to be a great way to present information back to your executives. I like this heat map style because blocks of red really jump out at you and draw your attention. I also like doing the maturity score, 1 to 5, because again, just because you have DLP doesn't necessarily mean that you're monitoring it correctly and you've got the proper responses and et cetera. So having some combination of a scoring system really comes in handy. But again, breaking that up by the framework components, again, makes it much easier to read and much easier to analyze. When you have all that nice information about the current state of your program, you can then create your priorities for the year. Again, you can kind of group them by those framework elements, come up with more detailed recommendations, maybe even look at what it would cost to implement that. But again, it's nice because it's tying back to that framework. So when somebody says, well, why should I spend money on disaster recovery? you can back up and say, well, if you notice, this is an area of red in our area, and this ties back to this part of the framework. Therefore, we feel that's something that's important for us to focus on this year. And again, that presents a nice, compelling argument of what you're trying to achieve. Over time, as you implement that project, now you've got another way to measure results. And again, hopefully, different squares on your dashboard are changing green, your maturity score is going up, and again, you can track all that, again, back across your security framework in your dashboard. It's really, the other thing I like to do is use my framework for awareness. So even though I may change the look and feel a little bit, again, the categories and the terminology that I'm using are consistent. And this is an easy way to go talk to other executives across my company about what we're doing in security. So rather than just showing up with, a big text document of what I'm trying to do, this is something that's easy. I rarely get an hour of time with the CFO or the VP of sales and marketing, but I can get 15 minutes or 20 minutes, and I can walk into his office with this 1 or 2 sheets of paper and hand it to him. And again, he's going to look at that, and being the critical business leader that he is, he's going to focus on the down arrows or the red and start asking me questions. So that allows me to have a conversation then with him about the security program, what we're trying to achieve, and why. So this is a great way to facilitate that conversation. The other thing that's nice about this is I can't be everywhere. Some of us work for really large companies, 78 locations around the world. So I can hand this with a few speaker notes to the CIO and say, hey, when you travel to India, can you have a conversation with the site manager or with some of the other leaders there, and here's some information that you can share with them. So it promotes that information sharing and allows me to get some help in spreading my security word around. So I'm not trying to advocate that you need to set your goal to turn your framework all green or reach maturity level 5. I really see this as just one part of the strategic development life cycle. Certainly you want to look at what your business priorities are and what your IT priorities are. But also, if you have these assessments and you have this framework, again, it allows you to make a compelling argument of why you chose this project or this priority over another one. Makes good sense to me. The last thing I wanted to check about is it adds credibility to your security journey as you go along. So one example is I took all of the security controls and security activities and mapped them to the kill chain methodology. You guys familiar with that one from Lockheed Martin? A few people are. What was interesting is after I mapped everything to it, I realized that towards the end of the kill chain, I didn't have any controls looking for outbound traffic. So most of the security investments that we were making were designed to protect against incoming threats around identity and access management, even around monitoring of lateral movement, but nothing looking outward going. So when I went to the CFO and said, hey, I think we need to invest in some additional security technology, something like FireEye or something that's looking at outbound traffic. Again, when he asked, well, we bought DOP last year, we bought Palo Alto the year before, why do you need yet another security control? Then I can show him that kill chain model and say, well, as you can see, if somebody were to get through our initial defenses and start sending data out, I have no visibility or no way to stop that or track that. So it presents, again, a much more compelling argument for my budget discussion with somebody by having that information framed in a way that if I hadn't mapped it to that kill chain, it would have never been obvious that was a big gap for us. The other thing that was real helpful is we get audited by clients and government agencies a lot. And so it's nice when they come and say, hey, what's your security strategy? Rather than just saying, well, we got all these cool tools and we do all this monitoring, I say, well, we follow SANS Top 20 Critical Controls Framework. Here's a heat map of where we've applied those different controls and how well we're doing. And the way we had it set up was you had the SANS Top 20 controls down one side, and along the top we had people, process, technology, and governance. So we scored each one of those SANS items against those 4 areas, and we were able to present a picture of, this is how we are today, here's my roadmap for this year and the next 2 years to try to address some of the big gaps in the dashboard, and this is the strategy that we're on. And what I found is you get a lot less questions from regulators and customers and clients when they see that you have an information and a strategy that's well put together and easy to present to them in a way that they can understand. So if we just kind of recap some of the benefits of using a framework and how you can use it, again, you get a nice insight into the foundational components. It allows you to highlight areas that need attention. They may not need attention. It may not be a big risk area for you, but again, at least it helps drive the conversation to see if that's an area that needs focus. It supports your strategic development, helps you measure and monitor your progress. It really helps with awareness materials and providing proof to third parties. And again, I think it provides even more credibility to your program and your approach overall going forward. So some key takeaways, again, that I would leave you with is certainly use a framework if you don't already today, or try to pick one and stick with it for 2-3 years so you can kind of measure and track your progress. And every once in a while, grab another framework and map to that, so that may uncover some hidden things that you hadn't discovered in the past. Involve your business when you're looking at these frameworks and answering the questions of whether you're red, yellow, green, or maturity level 1, 2, or 3. And know that it's just one of many tools that you can use to package your strategy and assess your security program. But again, I think it's very useful and very helpful. And it's one of those things that's been around for years and years and years. And so a lot of times what I find is people forget about that. Or they go, oh yeah, that's right, I forgot about ISO. So it's a good approach to use, and it's something that I've had a lot of success with in the past. And are starting to hear even some words around if you are compromised or breached, if you can show evidence that you were following a framework and had a solid strategy, that could lessen some of the financial impact and some of the penalty impact that you would receive. I don't know if that's officially true yet, but when talking to some colleagues who have gone through that, they have found that the regulators and the assessors have been much more forgiving when they were able to say, look, what more can I do? I'm following this industry standard framework. Here was our plan. We were marching towards it. I can only do so much in 1 year. So they got a little bit of a break there. So my intention was not to take up the whole hour. I know when I attend conferences, I hate trying to rush from one session to the next, and I know I'm right before lunch as well. So I just wanted to give you sort of a quick overview of frameworks and how I've used them in the past. And I'm here to answer any questions if anybody has. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm.
And of course, one of the concerns is we go called low, medium, high risk is subjectivity and inherent lies of those experts, right?
Right.
So the statistic that it's like 30 substances is not wrong because it gets to one way, different way, different person thinking it's the same thing, different days, different activities. Using guidance on training key maps, how do we reduce the subjectivity of those risk ratings?
So the thing that I've used in the past is coming up with a standard questionnaire. So you've got some criteria for, why that's a level 1 or why that's a yellow. I have documentation, I have a tool, I have somebody dedicated to monitoring it, etc. So usually what we would do is we would have 3 to 5 questions or maybe multiple questions for each maturity level or for each color, and then we would come up with some agreement of, okay, if I answer 4 out of 5 correct, that's a green. If I answer 3 out of 5, that's maybe a yellow. And then that way I turn any argument into, well, are there other questions I should ask, or would you rather there be 5 out of 5 for it to be green rather than attacking the methodology or the end result? Sure, and I've had that challenge too when using, you do something and you say, well, we're on 1.6 maturity level, and then I've got engineers trying to argue that it should be 1.7. in the end, that really doesn't change the conversation. It's still low. I still need help in that one. Yes, ma'am. I don't see, so in case you didn't hear the question, it was which frameworks are we seeing more requested and which ones less requested. I don't hear as much about ISO. I don't know if that's because it's been around a long time and everybody's already familiar with it, and so it's not as requested as often. The two that I've seen the most requested, NIST, because it's new, it's got the presidential executive order behind it, and so you're starting to see more and more companies look at that. The other one is the SANS Top 20. And I think the reason for that is it's pretty easy to get your arms around. It's only 20. It's not like, I think ISO has, 114 or 116 controls, and NIST is, 2-3 times that. So it's pretty easy to think, all right, 20. I can create a spreadsheet of 20 in 2 or 3 columns with it. And so I find that, especially for smaller companies or groups would have smaller security programs, they really like the cleanliness of that. That's a good question. Yes, sir. Yes. Sure. So the question for those in the back is, so I had security responsibility and also privacy responsibility at Texas Instruments. So how did I manage both facets of it when sometimes they can be in direct conflict? So the challenge, so one of the nice things is I had 2 bosses. So one was the CIO from an IT security standpoint, and then the other was general counsel from our legal department from a privacy standpoint. So I was getting direction both ways. Also, a number of the controls and technology that we would use to promote privacy and protect privacy were technology-based. So I was able to work that into the system. And then, in the grand scheme of things from an org chart, you got general counsel here and CIO here. So if there's ever a conflict, he usually won. And it also helped me because sometimes I was in that difficult situation of knowing, wow, this is really a bad idea from a privacy standpoint, but the CIO signs my check, so what do I do? So I could go to him and he can give me some direction there. So it wasn't as bad as it sounds, but on the other hand, TI was a manufacturing company, so it's not like we had a ton of personal information. We didn't take credit cards. We didn't have a whole lot of health records and things like that. Most of our stuff was IP protection. It might be a little bit more challenging if you were in a healthcare company or something like that. Yes, ma'am. I'm not seeing it gel together any better, just to be honest. I still think it's a pretty fragmented situation. We like to talk about how CISOs are in the risk management business, and it sounds great, but in reality, when you get right down to it, we're in the IT security business when it gets right down to it. I see risk tends to be much more driven out of either legal. Every once in a while, I've seen some actual risk groups. But again, they also tended to be separated. In the Alliance Data where I worked, we did have a risk management team that rolled up under, actually they rolled up under finance, believe it or not. But again, it was 2 separate teams. And so we tried to work together, but they managed their own risk register. And so really it's all about, right now, just about collaboration. If one of you have a good example of where it's well unified and consolidated, I'd love to hear about it. But I mean, I hate to say it, but I just haven't seen it. Any other questions? Be about frameworks or anything else? I'm good with that. All right, well, there's my contact information. If you do have any other questions, or if you want a copy of a slide or something like that, I've done that before when I've attended these events. I've gone up to the speaker and say, hey, I want slide 10 because I really liked how that was formatted and I want to use it in my company. So if you want to do that, just give me a holler. Thanks for letting me come.